Okay, it is time for our monthly check-in here with Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara. Thanks for joining us again today.
Sure.
Appreciate it. We wanted to kind of change our focus today. Normally we hit kind of a potpourri of different things that have been in the headlines, but today I think we wanted to really focus in on the federal law enforcement operations that have been going on, also the National Guard operations that we've been seeing in other cities. So specifically, I wanted to ask you about, starting with the National Guard, let's talk procedure here. If the federal government was going to activate the Guard in Minneapolis, what does that procedure look like? Would you be notified by them? How would you be notified, and when?
Well, just from the experience of other police chiefs that have been affected, where it has been a federal activation and not going through the state, there has not been good communication. In some cases, chiefs have found out from seeing news reports. So there definitely has not been good communication, which is concerning.
And you have not received any communication about anything?
Yeah, I've not received any communication from any level of government.
Do you know if the mayor has?
No.
Okay.
To my knowledge, no.
If you were notified, let's say today you left here and you were notified, even though you're saying that this is not really how it's happening, but if you found out the National Guard was coming to Minneapolis, what would your plan be? Because I'm sure you've been thinking about this, right?
Sure. Well, the biggest concern is that we would not have authority over how people would be used, but on the higher level, again, that there just would not be adequate communication. And that's just very concerning, because the police department in Minneapolis is the agency that's primarily responsible for public safety. And certainly I'm sure there would be legal challenges to any federal deployment, any deployment that does not go through the governor of Minnesota. I'm sure, as we've seen in other cities, would be met with some sort of legal challenge. But in the time being, anytime there's, whether it's outside law enforcement or any other National Guard or any kind of agency coming into the city, there should be communication with the police chief, regardless of whatever politics are going on. And I would hope people would be willing to listen to us, because we are the agency that's responsible for providing public safety. We're the ones that are here day in and day out with our residents. And hopefully we would be in a position to advocate for what would be appropriate and what's not appropriate under the circumstances. I think a lot of the stuff that we've seen nationally, I know from conversations with other chiefs, a lot of the rhetoric and things that have been said that are happening in cities, they're kind of calling each other, because there's stuff being said that's just not true about things happening inside the cities to justify, I think, some of this activity.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk specifically about, so I think one of the things you're alluding to is in a couple of the cities, so DC, Memphis specifically, it looks like there's efforts to kind of bring crime down, according to the White House. That's one piece of it. There's also, credible threats, the White House says, at some other places, suburban Chicago and Portland. But speaking specifically about the bringing crime down, right? Because that's kind of going to be under your umbrella. Can I ask you I want to talk about this communication piece of it, because you have said this is really important. Governor J.B. Pritzker was in town with Governor Walz. You may have seen a summit hosted by the Star Tribune where they were asked about this. And what you're saying, I understand. I'm curious how you're navigating. We're seeing leaders, politicians, from blue states saying, we're not getting the communication. At the same time, we're also hearing the same people saying, we're not talking to anybody, we're not helping anybody, right? And you're going to have to, I think J.B. Pritzker said, you're going to have to come through me to get through to Chicago. So when you have, as you said, rhetoric, and you have the politics going on, where does Chief O'Hara sit in the middle of that, and how do you
the reality
balance that?
Is the police department is literally the force that's left to be in the middle. That's where we are all the time. We're constantly the agency that is called upon whenever there are disputes to stand in between whatever sides might be literally fighting on the street, and hopefully be on the side of the rule of law, hopefully be on the side of de-escalating, hopefully be on the side of maintaining the peace and protecting our community. You mentioned Washington, D.C., which is a very unique case, because the two cities you mentioned, Memphis and Washington, is in this generic, we're fighting crime idea. Washington, D.C., the federal district, it's very unique into and of itself. There's no governor there, so there is a different authority for use of National Guard than there would be in our city. Memphis, Chief Davis that is there has inserted herself pretty well, I think, in discussions about how the National Guard is being used. The difference in Memphis as compared to what I think the situation would be in Minnesota is you have a governor there that does want the National Guard deployed in the city. So again, the governor still has authority in that case. The other cities, and those are the two cities where we're talking about general crime.
Correct.
The other cities where this is happening, Los Angeles and Los Angeles County, Portland, Chicago, at least Portland and LA for sure, the justification has for the use of Guard and federal troops has been, at least from what we're told, is protecting, federal property, federal facilities. That's the case right now in Portland.
And the White House says credible threats have been made, and we have seen attacks as we had in Dallas with a nice facility as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, at least in Portland, the Portland police, it's my understanding the Portland police have been involved in protecting that facility. And their reports and their information are different from what is being claimed about what is happening outside the facility in Portland. That's my understanding, and that's from my conversations with the chief there. What is being claimed is not actually happening.
So tell us about that. From your direct conversations with these other police chiefs, what is happening then, according to them, on the ground with the National Guard?
For example, there's a facility in Portland. We don't have any federal immigration facilities in Minneapolis.
Right.
There's a federal, I think it's a detention center in Portland. There have been some level of protest happening there over the last several months. The Portland police, who are responsible for the safety of people on the street, have been there and have been monitoring it. And there's nothing that has happened there that has been beyond the control of local law enforcement. And that's been the argument from the chief in LA and the county sheriff in LA that the protests and things that had happened there in the past were manageable by local law enforcement. And the idea when you bring in the National Guard in these types of situations, the idea is that you have already exhausted civilian law enforcement capacity. And I think the argument from these officials has been that they have not exhausted civilian law enforcement, that they are able to handle what's going on.
If the National Guard showed up here tomorrow, next week, would you put them to work? Would you want to put them to work?
Well, if they're going to be here in some way, I would hope I would be able to have a voice in the conversation. And I think it's important to understand, too, from what we see what's happening around the country, it's not just about National Guard. I mean, there's other federal law enforcement that has been called into the cities. I was in D.C., in the last couple of months, and I remember seeing, National Guard, just young kids, not armed, but they're, in fatigues, something on the back that said National Guard, kind of standing around by the monuments and stuff. But what was really striking to me was to see the U.S. Border Patrol driving around and patrolling streets in the city. And the same thing we have seen in Los Angeles, in Chicago. And there's images on TV of them patrolling and other operations that are happening. And then kind of the outrage and the unrest that follows, depending on whatever activity that they're engaging in.
So let's talk about those other operations. The ICE raids, other federal law enforcement operations. Minneapolis, of course, has sanctuary city policies in place, separation ordinance, so it prohibits people like you, city officials, police asking about somebody's immigration status. That's a big piece of it. Is there any circumstance where you do believe, though, it is appropriate for MPD to overlap with some of these federal law enforcement operations from inception to aftermath? Where do you draw those lines?
It's very clear. We draw the lines around non-criminal civil immigration enforcement. That's not our job. We don't have authority on it, and we don't provide information. We don't ask people about it. And it's been this way for a long time, and it's been this way in many cities for decades. This is nothing new. This is the way law enforcement has been handled. On the other hand, we do need help from all of federal law enforcement to go after violent offenders, gang members, people that are carjacking, people that are, bringing switches and illegal guns into the city, and bringing, pounds of fentanyl and meth and all these other things. We need to make sure that Minnesota and Minneapolis is getting our fair share of federal law enforcement to go after these folks. And we don't need a surge. We need a sustained, committed effort over the long term to go after the people that are causing the most harm on our streets, whether they're bringing in illegal guns, illegal drugs, or they're out here on our streets shooting and killing the people who live in our city. And that's something that is a long-term goal that we do need to make sure that we continue to work with federal law enforcement, and federal law enforcement does continue to provide us with our fair share of addressing those real harms in the community.
And the separation ordinance is real. It's something that has to be recognized and abided by. Those, though, who would say, okay, but ICE is removing criminals from our streets, federal, state, local, whatever. Even if the number is 3, maybe not 3,300, as Christine Ohm said, I think it was last week. Even if it was 3 people, isn't that more important, I think they would say, than sort of protecting an immigrant population who may be fearful of this? This is what is out there, right? So I want to give you an opportunity to kind of respond.
Yeah, this is what's out there because everybody's just, again, as usual, in their corners and kind of not looking at facts and reality here. Like, look, I have said, we want our fair share of federal law enforcement. Whoever's got the guns, whoever's got the drugs, whoever's shooting people, whoever's carjacking, nobody cares whether they're born here or they're not here. Those are the people we want to go after, right? I think the problem in general that we see is there's very clearly a reaction, a large reaction from a whole lot of people in the country that don't believe that what they see right now happening on the street in terms of immigration enforcement is legitimate law enforcement. A lot of people don't see that, what is happening, as legitimate law enforcement. And there's clearly a dichotomy between, again, not just what is being said about what's happening in certain cities, because again, chiefs are saying what they're saying on TV isn't what's actually happening on the ground here. But I think also the dichotomy is between we're being told this is just violent offenders, but then people on the street are seeing something different happen. They're seeing, raids and foot chases outside a Home Depot of day laborers, and people, raiding car washes of people that are outside just working and drying the windows. And I think the biggest problem for us is a lot of times people are painting us all the same. All of law enforcement is simply the same. We have done a lot of work in this town over the last few years to try and rebuild the relationship between the police and the community. And I think a collateral issue from all of this stuff is some of the tactics being used are clearly damaging to that effort. And people aren't just looking at it as just law enforcement, they're just federal law enforcement or immigration or ICE. They're looking at all of us, again, in general, are being painted with that broad brush. And I think it kind of harks back to where we used to be in policing. I think, if you look back, years ago, with I think people were, stuff with stop and frisk and, over policing and over enforcement and broad brush. I think that's what people are reacting a lot of times to what they see happening on the street. We're being told we're only going after the murderers and the rapists and whatever that are in the country illegally. That's what we are being told. But then what people see is stuff that goes back to like the 90s. They see these quotas. Mm-hmm. Oh no, we got to get 5,000 people a day. Are you getting 5,000 people a day, or are you getting the rapists and the murderers? Because which one is it? Because if you're just basing stuff in policing off of quotas and not trying to be precise about who you're going after, which is what we are trying to do in the city, there is no doubt that you're going to wind up causing collateral damage and roping up a whole lot of people that are not violent criminals, which again is what you want us to believe is actually happening out here.
And I think one of the things that I've seen the White House say about that specifically is that breaking the law is breaking the law, and
Sure.
who's to draw that line, right, between not showing up for a court hearing, your visa's expired, or a violent crime. And so I get what you're saying about the messaging, but
I'm not debating that.
Yeah.
But if that's what you're doing, just be honest with it. And that's got nothing to do with us. Again, we have nothing to do with and no interest, and we frankly just don't have the time or the people to be doing things outside of our scope. We don't have the authority, the power to engage in any of that, and we have no interest in it. But again, I think a lot of the things that we see happening in these cities with people reacting so badly to us because they see this as not being legitimate. I think a lot of people think they're being lied to. And again, it's being carried out in a way that I think is both, it's unsafe for the law enforcement officers that are involved, and it's generating a whole lot of backlash against law enforcement in general, which is just not good, and it's detrimental to the work that we are trying to do here.
And would you say, coming back to that communication piece, which is really the core here, would you say that it's fair to say that the rhetoric and the perceptions that are being built out there in the media and through politics it's political, and it's happening from both sides? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And would you call on, someone like a Governor Pritzker to say, could we just cool it here with the you'll have to come through me?
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean? Some of the language that's being used on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. I think that's probably true of just about any issue in policing and law enforcement where it's just wrapped up in this kind of everybody's so wound up in a lot of these issues, and rightfully so in a lot of cases. But for us as the police, again, we're trying to stick to what's most important. What is our role in this situation? We are here to try and keep the peace. We're here to try and keep the community safe, to not have things kind of unravel on our streets. That's where we are, and that should be completely apolitical no matter what side people are on.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. A lot more to talk about here with this, though, so we'll catch up more next time you come in. Hopefully another month or so we'll be able to get you in here. But appreciate your time, as always, Chief.
Thank you.
All right.